Yes, it is definitely Friday, April 19th, 2024, and a number of things are happening in the world as always. So definitely we'll be talking about those and seeing what's going on in the world. And of course, we've got our guest of honor who'll be talking about the Easter Seal Challenge as well. So I'm glad that she's joined us. But let me get to some of the news items that are taking place and all along those lines. But we've got the news that Iran has fired at an apparent Israeli attack drone near Isfahan Air Base and nuclear site. And Iran nuclear energy mountain is fully safe after the Israeli strike, according to their state media. And Tehran is playing down the reported Israeli attack and signals that they will not be having any retaliation. And in the Middle East crisis, Blinken is calling for calm as Iran officials say that, like I said, there is no plan for an immediate retaliation to the reported Israeli missile strike. And the House GOP aids bill for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan has advanced with the help of some Democrats as well. And it looks like we've got a jury over there in the Trump trial, and all along those lines, I think that there's like to have a couple of alternates they have to get to, but they definitely have a jury that has been put out there for the hush money trial, and we'll see how this all plays out and all along those lines. Of course, Mr. Trump did go on to a tirade after that was going on and all in that space. So it looks like juror number 4 has called the judge cowardly over being dismissed. So it definitely looks like one of the jurors was dismissed, but definitely it is going on. And it looks like the Trump hush money trial enters its fourth day and all in that space. But like I said, it does look like we have at least a full jury that is out there. And in terms of now, we just got to get the alternates, and we'll see how this all plays out and all in that space. And an ex Indiana teacher is accused of encouraging classmates to beat up a 7-year-old. So that is something that is going on, as an Indianapolis teacher allegedly recorded young students in a fight club style brawl inside the classroom, according to a lawsuit in that particular area, where they're saying that teachers encourage bullying of a special needs boy. So it was actually even more impactful in the fact that it was a special needs kid that was being encouraged to be bullied on and all along that kind of space. So that is some very sad news in that kind of way. An arrest of Ilan Omar's daughter at an anti-Israel protest was political, according to what some fellow squad members are saying. So she was among over 100 that were arrested at the Columbia University protests, and definitely that was going on as well there in the New York area. And the Biden administration is releasing revised Title IX rules so athletes can play amid sexual misconduct inquiries. And Biden has dismantled the Trump era Title IX rules and is sidestepping the issue of trans athletes in girls' sports, according to what Fox News is reporting. I'm sure other news outlets might put it in another kind of context and all along those lines. And looks like a Maryland high school student was arrested after authorities discovered a 129-page manifesto where he was, and it looks like he was charged with threats of mass violence after police discovered this disturbing manifesto that was going on in that space. And if you're wondering some other things that the Biden administration is doing, apparently they are restricting oil drilling and mining in Alaska. So the Biden administration is banning drilling in nearly half of Alaska petroleum reserve in a sweeping win for climate advocates. So it looks like Biden is set to block millions of acres in Alaska from oil and gas drilling in an Earth Day action that took place. And yes, Earth Day is coming up. As a matter of fact, I know that there are Earth Day celebrations here in North Carolina on Sunday. Matter of fact, there's some right here in the Durham area that I may be trying to attend. And I believe that that's the Central Park School that's doing those, if I remember correctly, and all along those lines. It looks like the Alejandro Mayorkas impeachment vote has been called shameful. So definitely that is something going on, as well as apparently Democrats tossed 2 centuries of precedent by rejecting Mayorkas' articles of impeachment. At least that's what Cruz is saying. So definitely we'll be hearing a lot about this as well. So definitely there are a number of things that are going on in the world, including people remembering some very sad news from 25 years ago. So 25 years after the school shooting, the Columbine effect still impacts us. So definitely that is something that people are reflecting on, because even 25 years after that attack, survivors are saying they're still haunted by that attack as well. So get to a couple of more world items, and then I'll also bring in our special guest and all along those lines to see what's going on with that Easter Seal Challenge. She's been doing a number of these, and these are always very interesting and all along those lines. So we're going to do that very shortly. But it does look like, as I said earlier, that the House Democrats rescued Mike Johnson to save a $95 billion aid bill for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. So in an unusual vote, Democrat rescue measure to allow the vote on the Ukraine bill. So it does look like there will be some money coming to those parts of the world from the United States. And so it'll be interesting to see what folks think about that, because I know a lot of people are also concerned about how that money could be used in this area as well. And in India, they are beginning their mammoth election. That's right, begin voting in mammoth polls. So definitely the world's largest democracy is going out there to the voting polls as well. So Indians vote in a huge election that is dominated by jobs, the concept of who's in charge, which is Mr. Modi, and Hindu pride. So definitely a lot of folks are going out there to vote in that particular part of the world as well. And hopefully that, I understand that could be taken not just days, but weeks, because you've got to get all of those people into the voting polls, and then you've got to get all of that counted as well. So definitely that will be quite interesting to see how that all goes in that space and along those lines. Like I said, I'm getting ready to bring in my guest and all in that space. We may get to some other news items as well, but I did want to bring in Anna Packman, who has been very much involved for a number of years now with the Easter Seal Challenge and all along those lines. So, Anna, glad that you were able to join us and be back and all along those lines. So I know you've been participating for a number of years in that Easter Seal Challenge. So if you just share a little bit about what the challenge is this time around and how you've been getting involved. And I know that you're definitely an advocate for folks that are involved in the whole differently abled community and all along those lines. So if you'll just share a little bit about your advocacy work and what you've been doing with the Easter Seal Challenge.
Hi, Mark. So great to be on with you again. Love having these conversations every year. I've been doing the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge now for 5 years. And I first have to ask, can you see me and hear me okay?
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Okay, great. So yeah, as I said, wonderful to be with you and your viewers. So the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge is a 5-day filmmaking competition that challenges filmmaking teams around the world to create a 5-minute short film in a genre that they assign every year to really highlight the authentic storylines that pertain to the lives of people with a variety of disabilities, and to elevate talent with disabilities, because I'm not sure if you or your viewers are aware of this. You probably actually are, because we've had this conversation now a few times. But even though the CDC estimates that people with disabilities are about 25% of the US population, the number of people, characters even on TV who are portrayed disabled is less than 5%. And those numbers behind the camera of people who are like in writers' rooms, who are directing shows or movies, those numbers are even smaller. It's less than 1% behind the camera. So my reason for engaging in the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge is because I strongly align with that mission of increasing representation, both in terms of the types of stories being told and giving opportunities to people who are extremely talented, both in front of and behind the camera.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know one of the things that I'm sure that one of our founders will be interested in, and all along those lines, is that the film that you chose to do this time, and if it's all right, I might show maybe not the full amount, but at least part of the what you sent, which is the clip, because I know that the embargo is off, and I don't know that you want the people to see all of it, because of course we want them to see at least part of it in the regular in venues and regular avenues and all along those lines. But I thought the opening really touched on something that I know that Nick, who is a pension attorney, will be interested in as well, which is this notion of how a lot of times those in the disability community have a lot of issues within insurance and within the way that things are handled in that space, because that's what wheelchair money is all about. And also this kind of cute story about trying to auction off a particular type of bear and all along those lines. But definitely, I just wondering if you could share what got you into that storyline. And then, like I said, if it's all right, I might play maybe not the full 6 minutes, but at least the first part so that people can get a idea of what the film is all about.
So yeah, Mark, I would be happy for you to play the first scene, the first 30 seconds or so, like the whole insurance scene, and then let's cut off and talk about it. How about
Yes. Yeah, that'll work. So let's do that really quickly, which is the scene with the gentleman and the lawyer, so which is right at the beginning. So let's play this, and then I'll cut that off, and then we'll go from there. So let's check this out, and then we'll have that conversation.
Sounds good.
You're not listening to me. What's the point of having insurance if I can't even get a new wheelchair?
I don't care what your doctor says. Rules are rules, compadre. Medicare specifies you need to be at least 300 pounds, and you're a svelte 169.
My wheelchair broke down on me twice this month already.
Okay, Johnny, now can you help me?
Whitney, you could be so inconsiderate sometimes, you know?
I could ask one of my followers on the talk if they can get you a new chair.
Like, who's going to give a complete stranger a $20,000 power wheelchair? Besides, you only have like 17 followers.
If you
Will that give them a little bit of an idea and everything along those lines and everything? But yeah, maybe if you could go into a little bit of explanation, because I do know that insurance is a important issue with what goes on with those in the disability community and all along with the differently able community and all along those lines. So if you could just maybe talk about that, because I did find that when I was watching the video to be a very poignant scene within the video.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I have to say that, as people with disabilities, oftentimes because we need, either durable medical equipment like wheelchairs or medicines or, like different things, we do have, on average, just more interaction with the health insurance system. But I will say that, like when I was writing that scene, I had absolutely everyone in mind, because I don't know a single person, disabled or not, who has not had a negative run-in with their health insurance company not paying for something that they should have paid for. And one of the things that I like to do in the work that I put out there and create is really make films that people with disabilities and people without disabilities can watch together and everyone can get something out of. And I've been told by, my non-disabled friends as well as my disabled friends about like just how relatable that scene is. I will tell you what inspired it actually is it's completely a true story. I myself use a powered wheelchair, and when I tried to get insurance to provide it to me to pay for it, I got rejected for the very reason as what we see in the film.
Wow. So you were definitely rejected in that the same kind of way and all along those lines. I know I've asked you this before, and I'm going to bring in one of my other fellow panelists, and Nick may join us as well, and we'll see if anybody else does. But how important, because I've asked you this before, but I know you always give a very good answer and all along those lines. Do you think it is for artists to be activists and all along those lines and everything? Because I do know that whether it is in the film community or even in the hip hop community, as a matter of fact, I just recently learned that here in Durham, one of our hip hop advocates was unfortunately and sadly lost their life to a heart attack, and they were very young, 32, but they were very much involved in our community, and a lot of people in that community are mourning the loss of that particular gentleman and all along those lines. But how important do you think it is for artists to be advocates?
Well, I think it's an opportunity, right? Like, I think, with art, it's so individual and it's everyone's personal choice and, how they, express themselves. But for me personally, it's incredibly important because art is so powerful in being able to connect people and to, spread awareness of things that people might not have considered before.
Right. And you heard me definitely say before, and I'm going to bring in Rick before, and you mentioned the fact that there is not enough representation in terms of the community, because there is a sizable part of the population that is differently abled, and sometimes people aren't even aware of the differently abled, because there are some that are very noticeable. People that are in a wheelchair, because like I said, I told you before, I get around by mass transit, so I do see people that are having to get buckled in on the bus and all along those lines. And for the most part, those folks that are blind and everything are very much easy to be recognized. But we also know that there are people that are differently abled that might have cognitive things going on and things that aren't as easily recognizable, and all in that space. And I don't think that they're represented as much in our media as well. But I just wanted your take on how we can do a better job of making sure that people that are in these spaces are actually being represented. Because I know that one thing happens is sometimes people that are perfectly well are playing the acting roles of those that are not well, and or that are differently able. I won't say not well, but they're differently able. So I just wanted your take on that, on both of those things that I just said, and then Rick might have a question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's very unfortunate that Hollywood has been not only allowing people who don't have any kind of disability to play disabled characters, especially since there are so few disabled roles to begin with, but that they reward it. So like a lot of times those actors, they win Oscars for playing us, which is completely unacceptable, ridiculous. Because I think everyone loses out when that happens. The audience, especially, first and foremost, because you don't get that authenticity of story that someone who has that lived experience can bring. It's the same thing, like, as a society move forward, like we used to have, men playing women before, and like now we understand that's not, an acceptable way. We need opportunities for all kinds of people in the theater, in film, in TV, and we can't just have like one particular group of people portraying everyone. So that's definitely something that I feel strongly about. I know a lot of people in the disability community feel strongly about it. I'm sorry, what was the other part of your question?
No, that was the basic primary part of it. The mic was breaking up a little bit and everything, but I think Rick had a question for you.
No, I just wanted to say that I'm on the spectrum, so I have a disability, but like from moment to moment and day to day, my relationship with it, I can lean into it, I can lean away from it, and it's not always straightforward. Sometimes, I was in writer's room with my, spectrum stuff, and sometimes, it made people like me, and sometimes it frustrated the heck out of people. And eventually I got an official diagnosis of OCD, thinking, well, because I was struggling at work, maybe this will make it harder for me to get fired. But then I was ashamed to turn that into an issue and say, when you just are, I never brought it up. I got the diagnosis so I could have it, but then I was kind of too ashamed to start using this leverage to keep my job.
Yeah. What's your take on that, Anna, and everything? Because I do know that there are people like Rick that are, have those diagnoses, particularly those that might be more on the spectrum or on the autism side, not so much those that are in wheelchairs, but sometimes there's that shame factor as well, where they are not trying to figure out how to even bring it up in the conversation in the job market, whether that's in the entertainment market or whether that's in regular day-to-day jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, it's kind of the dichotomy of like the disability community. There's, people like myself who are very visibly disabled, and like, there's nothing I can do to hide it, right? Like it's pointless to even try. And I do think that there is a little bit of like privilege, a little bit of struggle in both, scenarios where for me, like people see my disability and they understand it right away. They know like, oh, okay, this person needs a ramp. Like this is something that we can, kind of solve. We now understand this and we can deal with it. On the flip side, I don't have the ability to pass as non-disabled, whereas like people who have non-visible disabilities can. But from my friends in the disability community who have non-visible disabilities, one thing that like I feel very much, what Rick is saying, is that people don't believe them, or they don't understand how to accommodate them, or that they even need to be accommodated, which is also a big problem.
Yeah, and along those same lines, just out of curiosity, and I'm sure that Nick will have some questions as well, because he does have that legal background. But how do you feel we are doing in terms of as a society with making sure that most buildings are ADA compliant, because I know that, like I said before, I go around by mass transit, so I do know that the buses, for the most part, matter of fact, for all parts, have a couple of designated seats that are for those that are dealing with various different abilities, whether that's being in a wheelchair or whether that's being on a walker or a number of other things. But I don't know that every building does, even though I think that they're supposed to. And if I remember correctly, you're actually in an area that's very much in the news now, because if I remember correctly, you're in New York, and of course we know that's where Mr. Trump is as well and everything. But I was just wondering, do you think that the buildings themselves are doing enough to accommodate with the notion of being differently abled, and to make sure that people have access to the elevator or access to a way to get to wherever they're trying to get to?
Yeah, so I mean, look, New York's an interesting place because we have very mixed architecture here. So part of the city is very old, and part of the city is very new. So in newer buildings, it's usually a non-issue. Although, I'll give you an example. We had this new attraction open up called the Vessel, and the guy who built it, the whole concept of it is like it's all interconnected stairs. And this was opened, shortly before the pandemic, and it was opened in 2019, and it was just so insulting that someone in 2019 would design this whole structure that should be explored on multiple levels and not provide access to people with mobility disabilities to that. I would think that our world would move beyond that, just because the ADA, the overall federal law governing these things, was enacted in 1990, and so you would think that people had and an entire lifetime. There's lots of people I know who were born after the ADA at this point, and are full grown adults now, and in the workplace and in society. So you would think that people would know better, but you would be surprised the number of times these things happen. With older buildings, it's a mixed bag. I do have to say, especially credit to our last mayor, the de Blasio administration. They did a lot of work to try to work with businesses, especially restaurants. And now, so a lot of smaller restaurants, they may not be completely accessible, but they're doing the most that they can. There's, a couple places near me that I really like, and they have a step, but they also now have a ramp to get beyond that. And so, I think, where people, are really doing their best, that is where we can overcome these challenges. And a lot of times when things are not as accessible as they should be, it's a complete result of not as much the physical part of it, but the attitude, right? And it goes all the way up the chain to, our politicians who need to be held accountable for this, because it's all about, with public policy, it's all about who's prioritized and why, and what is prioritized. So in the film, there's a couple of scenes when people watch it on their own. It's where the character on this quest to get this Beanie Baby appraised has to go from Manhattan to Brooklyn, which anyone who knows New York, that is the hardest thing to do in a wheelchair, is go between boroughs. And at first, he tries to take the subway. Now, less than 40% of the subway stations in New York City even have some kind of wheelchair access, which is hugely problematic in the year 2024. There was a lawsuit, and it took several lawsuits actually for the MTA, which is the agency that administers the subway, to agree to fix this in the next 50 years, which is such a joke because, why should I have to wait to get full access until I'm in my 80s? When there are other cities like Washington, D.C., and there are other, great examples around the world like Tokyo, and even some cities in Europe like Barcelona that have either completely or almost completely accessible metro systems. So, that's a policy choice. That's a policy choice in terms of it just has not been prioritized to date. And then, the other challenge we face is that even when things exist, like the subway elevators, for example, they're oftentimes broken. So again, that's a choice to not prioritize in the budget for those things to constantly be maintained and fixed. And there's another, funny, because, it's comedy. The movie actually, it deals with serious subject matter, but it is a comedy at the end of the day. And so like any good comedy, we need a pee joke in there. And New York City elevators are famously full of pee because, we also have policies that don't do enough to help people especially people with mental illness, to get into housing and to get into services and not have to rely on living in the subways and therefore, using the elevators as a bathroom because they have no other option. So, like there's all these issues that kind of come to light and they all kind of go hand in hand.
How do you see these two trends interacting? On the one hand, increased visibility of people with disabilities in media versus impatience with wokeness coming from the right. They seem to be opposed.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think like probably the one group that the right is like not super opposed to is us. Because, take the ADA as an example. That was a bipartisan bill that was signed under the Bush administration. I think the one positive is, like anyone who, I am definitely not a Trump fan. Sorry if any of you are. But, like the one thing that I think everyone kind of agreed on in the I don't remember, I think it was the 2016 election when he made fun of that reporter with cerebral palsy. Like everyone on both sides was just appalled. Like you just don't do that. So I think, we're in this space. But yeah, I mean, but it's also like from a policy perspective, yes, the politicians on the right, I mean, both parties are not great, but the politicians on the right are worse in terms of like defunding things like Medicare, Medicaid, all of these like kind of services that make it possible for people with disabilities to get their basic needs met.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you just explain, because as I said, I know I've had you several times on before, but for those that are watching for the first time and maybe catching it here on World Edition, our news show and everything along those lines, what the Easter Seal Challenge is and how it came about, and maybe even where some of the other competitors are coming from, because you mentioned that they come from a variety of countries, and it's definitely, if you can just explain the process and how people can watch not just your film, but the other films and how the films are judged.
Yeah, absolutely. So this year there are 135 films competing in the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge. That's the most films that the challenge has ever had. And there are filmmaking teams all over the world. I think there's one out of the Netherlands. Most are US based. I know there's one out of Canada. A lot of people, from LA, particularly with Hollywood being out there. But we are growing our presence on the East. Several really fantastic films that were made here on the East Coast, both in New York and neighboring areas. And the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge, the way it works is that teams have to have at least one person with disability. My team has much more than that. So, I have a disability myself, but all of the actors in Wheelchair Money have a disability of some sort, some, more visible than others. And a few people behind the scenes do as well. So in terms of the process, so every January they announce what the genre is. We have to put together our teams, and it's kind of the same as any production. You kind of decide what roles you want to have there, and then it's a 5-day challenge. So on the first day of the challenge, we get the full theme, which includes specific story prompts. It includes location prompts, and it includes prop prompts, and that's just so that they know for sure that all of the teams made their films in the 5 days that are allotted during the challenge. And then once the films are live, they go onto, this year they're on the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and you search Easter Seals, one word, Disability Film Challenge, you'll find all 135 films. They're also available on the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge page on Facebook. And I highly recommend watching all of them because there's a lot of great work this year.
Sounds great and everything. Nick, kind of, if you had any questions or any thoughts, because you are our legal expert in addition to being a lawyer. I know Rick had another question, but definitely you've been involved in the pension space and definitely the space around various kinds of law. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts.
Oh, yeah, I was just looking through the financials. One thing, if you're looking at any tax-exempt organization, there's a form called a Form 990, which is required to be filled out by the IRS and publicly discloses the administration costs, the fundraising costs. So I was looking at how much you guys are spending on fundraising costs, how many actually went to the disabled people, because some of these charities are upside down. Good news is your CEO only makes like 200,000 a year. The PBS CEO makes like 900,000 a year, and they have a bunch of people that are over 500,000. But it looks like Easter Seals are keeping CEO compensation what I call reasonable. Also, it looks like a reasonable allocation toward administrative cost and fundraising costs. Even though these are big numbers, like 30 million in fundraising costs, you're talking Easter Seals is basically a $2 billion organization. It's not small at all by any stretch of the imagination. So, I encourage our listeners to look at Form 990 whenever you donate to a charity, because the thing is, that's where they disclose, that's where the sins are buried, let's put it that way, the good news, bad news, et cetera. In terms of Pod TV, okay, since we last year had 2.3 million views on our network, we have no problem of redistributing your movies if you let us do that. Because we right now on Pod TV, we run 4 channels on Roku. We have a travel channel, a sports channel, we have a political channel, believe it or not, and we also have Pod TV Live. So I have 4 channels on Roku and 4 channels on Amazon. So we have plenty of space to run that. If you guys have some good movies, you send it to Mark. He knows how to do everything. Don't send it to me. I don't know how to do anything. But Mark knows how to do everything, or he'll send it to our engineers and get those movies on the Pod TV network, which people can see on Roku and Roku TV, and also on Amazon. They call it Amazon Fire, which is on your tablet. So those are basically my comments. I like beaming Form 990 because most people don't even know what it is. But it's the first thing I check before I do charitable contributions. Right.
So how has COVID affected the disability landscape? On the one hand, more telecommuting, which probably eases some people's, and on the other hand, more than 10 million people with long COVID now, have some degree of disability. Also, from what I read in social media, that some disabilities put you more at risk for among the unmasked and the unvaxxed.
Yeah, I would say.
Those are great questions. I'm just going to address what Nick said first, and then Rick, I would love to kind of get to your really important points. So Nick, thank you so much for that information. I just have to fully disclose that I'm an independent filmmaker participating in the challenge. I do not represent Easter Seals, but I would be happy to connect you to the director. Really appreciate your feedback here. So going to Rick's question, that really touches me personally, because I actually am someone in my day-to-day life who is, I vacillate between calling it COVID cautious and COVID smart, because you're right, 100%. The virus is still very much a risk to people with a lot of different types of disabilities, especially I have cerebral palsy, which is a neurological disability. It's I understand your concerns of I know people with autism and on the spectrum are also at higher risk. And you're completely right. It's definitely been a challenge, and something actually in making this film for me that was very important is making sure that even though the CDC and the Screen Actors Guild, which the Screen Actors Guild, by the way, had the most incredible set of completely scientifically based guidelines that actually made sense and kept people in the industry honestly safer than people at many healthcare facilities for the last 3.5 years. Last May, they actually dropped those guidelines. So now it's up to individual producers. And as a producer, particularly with the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge, the way it works is everyone on the project has to be a volunteer. And there is no way in good conscience as a producer that I could ask anyone, whether they're disabled or not, knowing the risk of long COVID, which, by the way, the World Health Organization puts at 10% of all cases. So not even 10% of all people will get some form of long COVID, 10% of all infections. And if you average it out, if the average person is getting 2 infections a year, that is not good news, not just for the disability, but that's just bad news for everyone in general. So, knowing what I know, there was no way that in good conscience I could have a set that didn't use the science that I've been following, that the medical community has really put forth as being best practice, that SAG themselves had, implemented for so long and so well to keep people safe, and ask anyone to risk their future, livelihood to work on my film for free. So one of the things we did, and I was very fortunate, I reached out to several of there are several companies that are making these next generation tests, which are rapid tests. So they're a little different than like the home tests that the federal government was mailing out, in that they take a little longer. They take about a half an hour, but they're still tests that you can do at home. But the sensitivity of those tests is more similar to the much more expensive PCR type testing that you have to get done in a lab. And one of the companies, Aptitude Medical Systems, was kind enough to send me a big box of tests for my production. So thank you to them. They're called Metrix tests, and those are 97% accurate. They are they're considered molecular tests, but they are just about as accurate as a PCR test. And we used that during production, and we had a testing regimen where we asked people to test on just a regular home test the day before they came to set. And then when they were on set, they took these Metrix tests. And that gave everyone just a peace of mind that, they could get to work, they could do their thing, do what they're good at, and not have to worry about getting sick, whether, long-term, taking the risk of getting, a serious long-term condition, or even in the short term, because these are all busy people. And the thing with the film industry, particularly on the crew side, these are very physically demanding jobs. So the people who are setting up the camera, the people, those people are lugging around very, very heavy equipment. So if they get sick even for a week, they could lose another job. Like, it wouldn't be fair for me to be responsible for that. So the responsible thing to do is to make the, sets as safe as possible. And also, from an accessibility perspective and an accommodation perspective, just making sure that that was not going to be a reason why anyone who wanted to participate in the project would be unable to do so.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. You had mentioned earlier having cerebral palsy, and I will let you know that it's definitely, Nick knows as well, and I need to reach back out to her. But there was a time in the early stages of this network, and we had the show for a number of times, that we actually had Win with Win, which was actually a young lady out of the West Coast who was part of that community and everything. And we may be trying to get her back at some point, but she definitely had a show here on the network a couple of times. So she actually comes out of that same space that you do as well. And a lot of it was advocacy work. And I know part of it was her moving around was the reason that the show isn't on, but I do need to reach out to her, and hopefully we'll get it back on in the near future. But it definitely dealt with disability on or different abilities on a regular basis and all along those lines. So hopefully we'll get her back on, or maybe we'll get you to do one if she's unavailable, or all along those lines. But we'll have to see if that's able to be there, because one of the things I know Nick likes to be proud of is the fact that we are a very diverse network, because having shows that are Latin American, African American, shows that deal with all kinds of topics, including chess and investment and a number of other things. So it is a very diverse network at Pod TV, and that's something that I know both Nick and Kim are quite proud of, and all along those lines. So definitely that's something.
Mark, does major media show, or maybe Anna could help ask that, do you ever see anybody that has disability on major media? I can't recall when I saw a weather person or a spokesman or anybody on any show that has a disability, or is it because there's extremely very few people have disability, or why, or does media just not even show it? Or can you tell me one show that you watch to say, oh, there's a person that has cerebral palsy, or there's a person in a wheelchair? I don't watch much television, I have to admit that, and I don't watch many movies, so I'm really poor at it. Do you know any movies or TV shows that highlight people that have disabilities, Anna? I'll direct it to you because you may know.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, I actually worked in the TV industry for a number of years before moving on. Very, very close to that as well. And that's such a great question, because Mark and I were just talking about this before you joined, Nick. But the CDC estimates that 25% of the U.S. population has a disability of some sort.
Sure.
Now, there are folks who do, there are folks out there who, shout out to Dominic Evans and his team. They watch every single show on network TV and just look for characters with disabilities. And so what they found is that less than 5% of the characters and these are scripted TV shows, disabilities. I'm not sure if they include reality shows or not. But also in terms of the news and things like weather and like, you know, people actually like doing broadcast journalism. Yeah. I can't recall when. I know actually one time. So I have a friend named Maysoon Zaid, and she was on the Keith Olbermann show when that was on Current TV. And I think at this point that was, you know, more than 10 years ago for sure, because that
Okay.
was on. And that's one person, and that's it. I mean, there might be people.
Well, we have Rick Rosner, so he counts for something, I guess. You know.
Are you on the news?
No. I'm just I come on here every day and yell and interrupt. But maybe the most famous show with an actor character with cerebral palsy is Breaking Bad, which I'd recommend to anybody, except it's a tough show to watch because it's so grim. Not grim for that character, but the events in the characters' lives and the behavior. It's a tough show.
I just love to watch grim, depressing shows. I mean, I just can't wait to do that, you know.
Well, it's also entertaining. It's a crime drama. So, you know, if you like, you know.
And just to let you know, just because you asked the question, no, he does news with us, and he also has a show, Naked at Night, which airs about once every 2 weeks or something, which is a debate show with him and a very conservative gentleman, because I would say that Rick is relatively liberal. His friend Lance is very much conservative. I kind of like to think of it as point, counterpoint. I will produce the show and sometimes pop in with a question or two, and he also has a friend that is a musician, so they do that, like I said, about once every 2 weeks, and that airs here on the network. But Rick's other claim to fame is that he actually managed to sue some game shows, and I think at least one or two. And
no, I just sued one. I only sued
one game show, and because they did not allow a right answer, even though it was the right answer.
Okay, it was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? They give you 4 choices, and the correct answer wasn't one of the 4 choices. And
oops.
So, and one of the deals maybe with being on the spectrum is that like you get focused like very strongly on stuff. Like, you know, you can have, you know, autistic people can have very strong focused interests that are, you know, like trains or the most, the guy with the highest IQ in history, William Sidis, 100 years ago, he was focused on bus transfer. Like they give you a little piece of paper if you want to go from one bus to another without paying another fare. He collected those. So yeah, it's that's part of the deal, is getting heavily focused on ridiculous stuff. In my case, you know, I spent several years suing a quiz show. And I mean, another thing is, you know, I got yelled at a lot in my TV jobs for not being able to read the room, because like TV is, you know, is a lot of people in TV have the opposite of autism. They have really good social skills, and then you put somebody with maybe not great, and there's.
But Rick, one of your former bosses, because I was gonna, and we can definitely got a few more minutes to talk about some of the other issues, and hopefully Anna will stick around as well, because I definitely want to hear her opinion on one of the things I'm going to bring up and everything. Because one of your former bosses is now on the hit list for Mr. Trump, because apparently they're not liking each other, because he tried to attack him, because you did work with Jimmy Kimmel, and apparently Jimmy Kimmel.
Oh, you mean stupid Jimmy Kimmel?
On the hit list for Mr. Trump and all along those lines. So definitely, you just want to share your reflections on
Now, I was gone from Kimmel. I'd already, I wasn't working there during COVID, but I know from that they ran an excellent, I assume still do, very COVID safe production. You've got 100 to 200 people working on that show, a lot of testing, a lot of masks, a lot of like being conscientious and making it safe for everybody.
Yeah. Speaking of safe for everybody, because that was something that I was going to allude to, and everything I noticed is slightly getting off of our topic with the Easter seal and everything, but you kind of alluded to it, Anna. You are there in New York. I know that there is notions of the safety of not just New York, but the safety in general with that trial going on. And you just earlier said you're not the biggest fan, and I think a lot of folks here on the network aren't, even though Nick is claiming that he's going to win the election. I hope he's wrong, and all along those lines and all in that space. But I just wanted your just take on New York and how New York is handling this trial, because this trial is going to be going on for a while. I'm thinking at least a month or two and everything, but I just wanted your take as to how it is being handled and just your reflections as a New Yorker.
You know, I don't really have a strong opinion on that because I've been locked in my apartment for the past week promoting this film. I, to be honest, have not been paying too much attention.
I just want to give a shout out to
Good, you didn't miss anything.
New York's pea smell. Shout out to the pea smell, but also the hot garbage smell in the summer, where the dumpster water like gets heated up, and there's often bags of garbage on the street, and that gives New York a very characteristic garbage stink, which isn't great, but like lets you know you're in an exciting city.
Yeah, you're right. It just smells really good. You know, I mean,
It smells totally good.
I go to
But
New York
Anna, just
twice a
really
year, so I
quickly,
can
what
smell the
about
garbage.
New York is the reason that you decided to bring your entertainment careers there? Because like I said, you're in the film industry, and a lot of people would think that you would be wanting to move to LA where Rick is and all along those lines, even though I know there's a very active film community in a lot of places, including even lesser than it used to be, but there is one here in North Carolina, both film and television and all along those lines, and definitely down there in Georgia and a number of other places, including Louisiana, and even Canada, where Sasha is and everything. But what made you like to base yourself in an area that is more known for theater necessarily than film? So what about New York is the appeal to you, Anna?
Well, I grew up here, so New York is home for me. There's not like really much of a complicated answer, but I will say that I love living in New York. Yes, we do have certain aromas, but we also have really pretty gardens, and those smell much better. For me, also as a filmmaker, what's really exciting about producing film in New York, two things. Nick, you will appreciate this as a lawyer, but we are allowed to film anything we want on the sidewalks without a permit, as long as it's like a small enough production.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's
That's good. Yeah, I didn't know that.
like those shots that you see out on the street. I didn't have to work with the city to figure that out. We could just go out there with our camera and do it, and no one can say anything.
Right.
The other, thing, and like the bridges are actually considered public streets too. So we were able to get the public bridge, but it's just like you do have to get permission from the Department of Transportation. But the people there are wonderful. They're super easy to work with. That was no problem at all to just work with them to get that permission. And it's free. So that like these amazing locations, like filming on something as iconic as the Brooklyn Bridge for free, like you don't get that in LA. You don't get that anywhere else. So as a filmmaker, like there's these exciting opportunities to use these iconic scenes of the city that people are used to seeing in like really, really big movies, and to apply that same quality and bring that same excitement to disability stories, I think is really special. So
and you mentioned earlier, and I'm going to actually toss this one to you, but I'm sure that definitely Nick will be interested in all along this line, because you mentioned that there are some places that are very much doing a better job in terms of the way that they handle the differently abled community. And one of those places that you mentioned was where Nick is going to be going on a slight jaunt there in a not too distant future to visit, and that be in Spain, because you mentioned Barcelona, and I imagine there are other parts of Spain that are really good as well. So maybe if you could just talk about how we are doing compared to other parts of the world, because I did hear you say that Spain apparently is doing some very good work in that space of how they are handling those that are differently abled.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because like it's kind of like the same with accessibility. The pandemic is like every country does something really well and then something else like really badly, and so they all like have succeeded and failed in their own ways. So one thing that I will say, like Barcelona is one of my favorite cities in the world, and it's so easy to get around as a wheelchair user, because almost I think like I don't remember how many, but like maybe 5 of their subway stops don't have elevator access or wheelchair access. And I just remember going there a few years ago and just not having a problem going anywhere between the buses and the subways, but it was very hard to get a cab there. And like here, like you see in the movies, like they have a hard time getting, the cab via street. A whole other issue where like the drivers, specifically like, they discriminate against us, and they just don't want to deal with picking us up. We do have accessible Ubers, and we do actually have, the city has an app which you can use to hail one of the yellow taxis via phone, which is more reliable. It just takes a little longer. And, you know, if you're already on the street, it's like annoying to have to go into your phone and do that versus being able to just hail it like anyone else.
Just out of curiosity, because we've got Sasha here with us as well, and in about a few minutes we'll be going over to his show dealing with Russia, Ukraine, and China. But how is Canada? And he's in one of the provinces, but there are a number of provinces. But I just wondering, in your assessment and just in general, how is the area of Canada doing in terms of disability or differently ability awareness?
It's a difficult question because it's a policy in Canada to provide facilities for handicapped people or challenged people. However, right now in Canada, there is probably the most important chess tournament of this year. It's being held in facilities when there is absolutely no access to handicapped or physically challenged people. Absolutely not. And the stairs are very steep. And when I was exiting that, I fell 3 stairs of that facility. And of course, I could make a great scene, calling ambulance and police and everything else and start legal proceedings. My problem was that, first of all, I was with my wife and my car was parked right there. So that would mean that I would have to go to the hospital for x-rays and everything. And I mean, the car would stay there. Then I would have to go back to pick up the car. It was just a little bit too much. I regret now that I haven't done it, but there's nothing you can do now. So speaking about Canada, is a difficult thing when you see that in your city of Toronto, you see the major international event is being held with no accessibility for handicapped people. It's incredible. I'm very upset about it.
2 questions for Anna. One is, so if you're shooting a crowd scene on a sidewalk, you don't have to get clearance from anybody walking through that's great, because in LA, yeah, you have to have clipboard people chase down anybody who might have been in your scene. And all right, question 2 is, is wheelchair technology improving if you have the money for a nice wheelchair? Because the wheelchairs I've worked with are clunky and they're a pain in the butt.
Yeah. So yes, especially like the custom rehab wheelchairs, as they're called. There are some fancy chairs out there. I have a friend out in LA who just got one that like can now start climbing stairs a little bit, which to me, I would be scared to do it, but it seems super cool. But yeah, I mean, they're constantly coming up with new things.
Can we look forward to, like, one thing that kills a lot of old people is just falling down. Mm-hmm. Can we look forward, and not that you're necessarily an expert on this stuff, but that some people will in the near future might be able to have like robotic legs that give them mobility that way?
That's an interesting concept. I do know that there are companies that actually, Jesse, who's the star of my film, I've seen him using there's like these exoskeleton manufacturers where someone could get, like to your point, it's almost like braces, but they're smart braces and they will like walk for you essentially. I mean, I don't know how good they are in terms of like, with cerebral palsy, I have very poor balance. I don't know how like that would work out for someone like me, having poor balance and not being able to like control that as easily. I probably would end up on the floor, to your point. But yeah, I don't know if there's like anything like that. But I'm personally and professionally just very interested in AI, and it seems that like AI is starting to make its way into some of these applications as well, which could potentially be exciting.
Yeah, along those same lines and everything, I was just wondering, how do you think that residents are doing in terms of like personal residents, in terms of making sure that they are ADA compliant? Because I know a lot of times we are very much interested in the notion of office buildings and public facilities and all along those lines. But I live in an apartment complex. I don't know that it is totally ADA compliant. And then definitely my mom, when my aunt was living, the one that passed away and everything, she had MF, so she built a lift, and the lift is now being replaced because my younger brother is going through some similar kind of stuff in his health journey and everything. So she wants to make sure that that lift is there, both as she ages and gets older, as well as some of the things that my younger brother is going through. So I just wondered, do you think that we are doing enough to make sure that houses in general and apartments in general are ADA compliant, or is this something that isn't given as much of a notion as, say, it is with the bigger offices and some of the more public facilities?
That's a great question, Mark. It is one of the toughest things for the disability community is like finding, physically accessible places to live, because there are very few accessible units. At least, I can talk to here in New York City. Affordability is a huge issue. So the newer buildings that are more accessible, like they're usually classified as luxury buildings, and those are just like cost prohibitive for most people. And even then, unless like I'm very lucky, I live in a building that's under, that gets some federal funding, and so therefore like they were required to make modifications to my bathroom, to my kitchen for me, and that's considered a unicorn. Like that very rarely happens. Most people, like they have to pay for it out of pocket to, if they want a modification. And what's terrible also under the current housing policies and laws is that if you do that, you're also liable. Like, let's say you need a roll-in shower, you move into an apartment, you pay probably like $10,000 or whatnot to get that done. You then, if you move out, you have to pay to get it converted back to being inaccessible, which is like the most wild requirement. So the landlord is required to like let you do it if you live in a private residence. However, they can require you to bring the unit back to its original condition. And I know, like, being so fortunate in having this apartment, like I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, but I know friends who have been, in the market for homes and like, in other areas where it's more like standalone single family housing, for sure, like it's almost impossible to find a house that you don't need to do like significant renovations on to be able to get into your own front door.
Wow, that's amazing and everything. Well, I know we're winding down. This has been a fascinating conversation about what's going on in this community and also your involvement with the Easter Seal Challenge and all along those lines and everything. I know we're going to go over to the Russia, Ukraine, China show with Sasha and hear about those discussions as well. But as we're heading out the door, and if you'll let folks know how you can be reached and definitely how you can be contacted in any other things that you might want to just share really quickly. But definitely this has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm looking forward to having more of these with you in the not too distant future and everything. But definitely glad to be able to help you out in terms of getting the word out and for folks to hear about this important film work that you're doing.
Yeah, Mark, thank you so much for hosting me. In terms of how folks could get in touch, you can find me on almost all social media channels at Annated. So it's like my name, ANNATATED. And I'm mostly on Instagram and Twitter publicly. But please follow me. Please engage. Please watch Wheelchair Money on the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge YouTube or Facebook pages.
Sounds great. Definitely appreciate it. Like I say, we're going to get on out of here unless Sasha or Rick had some final comments that they wanted to share, but we're going to get out of here. But it's been
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So like I said, we're here to get on out of here, and definitely a great conversation. And we'll be back with more news on Monday when we come back with more World Edition. I think we've got some more guests scheduled as well. But right now we're here to get on out of here. And it's been another fun week of conversation, both with guests as well as with our regular folks. But we'll be back with World Edition and World Politics on next week. So World Edition is every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. and World Politics is every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 o'clock. But right now we're going to get on out of here, and we'll catch y'all on the flip side. And then we've got a show about interior designing coming your way at 2 o'clock that is coming out of California. But right now, let's get on out of here.